Welcome to this ATA Insights webinar. Thank you for your ongoing interest and support of our webinar program. Today's session will begin in 2 minutes. ATA Insights Webinars is an online platform for the dissemination of professional renewable energy knowledge across international borders. Our aim is to democratize access to information, for innovation to spread faster, and to make the industry more competitive. And we do this through our online session, open to all our members. Every year we do more than 100 sessions with over 250 speakers, 50,000 attendees from more than 50 countries. To participate in the session today, use the chat on the right-hand side to introduce yourself, your company, and where you're joining from. Under the screen, you will find the Q&A box, where you can send your questions for the speakers. We will get to as many as we can today. We're recording this session, and we will send you a link to the materials in a few days. Please consider supporting our content creation for the webinar program. Contact us on the email on screen.
Hello everyone, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are connecting from. Welcome to today's webinar on reducing the cost of renewable hydrogen. Today we have 4 experts with us who will tell us more about how and when renewable hydrogen's cost will be equivalent to that of grey hydrogen and eventually lower. Before we start, I'd like to ask you to share in the chat where you're actually connecting from today. So today I'm actually connecting from Berlin. And my colleague Andres, whom you can't see because he's behind the scenes, he's connecting from Spain, from Malaga, I believe. So in any case, let's get started with a short round of introductions. So I'll get you to introduce yourselves as you are on the screen. So Stefan, if you could please briefly introduce yourself, please, and let us know who you are.
Glad to do so. My name is Stefan Reicherstein. I'm a professor at the University of Mannheim in Germany, where I also run the Mannheim Institute for Sustainable Energy Studies. I also keep my previous affiliation at the Stanford Business School. Our institutes have been working for about 10 years squarely on the cost of renewable energy and storage solutions, and that's what has brought us to hydrogen in particular.
Thank you very much, Stefan. And next, Carola, if you could please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello, my name is Carola Kanz. I'm actually connecting from Brussels today. I'm Deputy Managing Director of a platform on power-to-X and hydrogen within the VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industries Association. And I'm an energy policy expert, and I concentrate on hydrogen for the last 2 years.
Thank you very much, Carola. Kevin, could you please briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Kevin Beer. I'm the head of sales B2B North Germany for E.ON. I work together with my customers on sustainable solutions. And yeah, in the last 2 years, hydrogen is really a big trigger and driver for the future of our industrial customers. And I present some ideas and solutions today for you.
Thank you, Kevin. And John, please, if you could introduce yourself and get ready to present next.
Okay, thanks, Carlos. Good morning, everyone. My name is John Williams. I work for AFRY Management Consulting within the wider AFRY group, and I'm head of our hydrogen expertise cluster, so responsible for developing our advisory services across our network of global offices.
Thank you very much, John. Well, without further delay, if you could please start whenever you're ready.
Okay. I am just sharing my screen, so hopefully that should be coming through.
Yeah, we can see, but we can't see the notes and everything.
Yeah,
So if you,
I know. Yeah, sorry, my mistake. Here we go.
that's okay. Okay,
Here we go. Back to my
over
titles.
to you.
Okay. So, oh no, I've lost it. Sorry. Let me try again. My apologies.
It's okay. It happens when you're live. And by the way, to everyone who is in the audience, remember that you can send your questions. So don't leave today without sending in your questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can within the time constraints that we have. And yes, we have. We are recording the session, and we'll share it with you in the next few days through our online platform, My APA.
Okay, my apologies. Inadvertently closed down my PowerPoint, and now it's telling me I've got a problem with my PowerPoint.
Okay, I see. Well, I don't know if maybe.
Okay, hold on. I think we're okay. I think we're okay. Let me see if that will share. Are we there?
Can I? No, I can't see it. No.
Right. Let me try one more time.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We can see it now. See if we can.
Okay.
Put it on full screen, please.
Yeah.
Then.
Just trying. There we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
Over to you, John.
Right. Okay. Apologies for the slight delay. So today, what I'm going to touch upon is just some of our views on some of the costs and the cost evolution of green hydrogen production. So there we go. Okay, so when we think about the costs of green hydrogen, there are two main elements that we need to consider. Firstly, the cost of the power, or importantly, the renewable power that is feeding the electrolyzer system, which is the second main element of the cost. Now, as we're only thinking about green hydrogen today, it's important that the power that is used in an electrolyzer is also green. And this can most easily be achieved by connecting the renewables directly to the electrolyzer system. And here there's the distinction between connecting directly to the electrolyzer system as opposed to connecting the electrolyzer just to the grid. Now, connecting the grid is also an option, but it's really important to remember that any power source for the electrolyzer from the grid will need to be from renewable providers and most likely backed up with PPAs. So the cost of electrolyzer usually given in euro per kilowatt for us here in Europe. And when you see those figures quoted, it's important to understand whether the numbers given just include the electrolyzer or also include the balance of plant. And that is really important in order to get a good idea of any projects and project economics that you're considering. Now, what we also need to consider is the load factor at which the electrolyzer will operate. And higher load factors, higher utilization in terms of operating hours of the electrolyzer will lead to lower production costs. And you can see this in the chart on the right-hand side. And this shows our calculation of the levelized cost of hydrogen, the LCOH, for a range of solar load factors in different regions. And here we're showing Europe, Middle East, North Africa, and Chile, just to give you an idea of how the increasing load factor in good renewable locations can reduce the costs of hydrogen production. What I'm also showing here is an indicative grey hydrogen price based on methane reformation with Dutch gas prices. And what is clear from this is that in those regions with good renewable load factors, you're able to produce hydrogen at the lowest cost and therefore be more competitive with grey hydrogen. However, it's important to remember that the best load factors will only be achieved in certain regions. And so we also need to consider what else we can do to reduce hydrogen production costs. So we expect electrolyzer costs to reduce steadily as a result of the scale up of manufacturing capability and improvements in technology and electrolyzer performance. The chart you can see here, it's a bit busy, I know, but it shows our cost curves for alkaline electrolyzer capex reductions from 2030, alongside the assumptions used by others here, BNEF, IEA, and the EU via the assets study. You'll see that I included here both our projections from Q1 and Q2 this year, which shows you how quickly our assumptions are changing as a result of new information becoming available. Other types of electrolyzer, PEM and solid oxide, will have different cost reduction curves, and whilst are more expensive today, should show steeper reductions in costs as those technologies develop. So in addition to the electrolyzer costs, we also expect cost reductions in the capex required for renewables. And here we show our central scenario assumptions for solar, onshore and offshore wind out to 2050. You see the most significant reduction is in offshore wind costs, and this is driven by a number of factors. Firstly, onshore wind is more established, so we've seen some of the cost reductions there already. The potential capacity increases for offshore wind turbines is greater, and we've seen those offshore turbines increase in capacity from 2 to 3 megawatt to around 14 megawatt today, whilst in future we might also see increases up to 25 megawatt. We don't expect the same increases in onshore wind turbines, and we currently expect those to top out maybe around about 5 to 6 megawatts. Offshore projects are also likely to be much larger in scale than onshore and benefit from the economies of scale that you'll see. And also remember, it's probably easier to connect a single 1 gigawatt offshore project than 10, 100 megawatt projects that would either be offshore or onshore. So with these reductions in mind, how can this affect hydrogen production costs? So here I'm showing our calculation of LCOH in the Netherlands in 2025 from SMR, methane reformation, which is grey hydrogen, methane reformation with CCS, blue hydrogen, and then renewables with an alkaline electrolyzer for green hydrogen from different renewable sources. Good wind load factors in the Netherlands lead to the lowest green hydrogen production costs, but these are still higher than both grey and blue hydrogen in 2025. You'll see the solar bar is quite high, and this is due to the higher or the lower load factors that we would expect to see in the Netherlands. Now, by 2030, we can see green hydrogen production costs have reduced due to lower renewable and electrolyzer costs. Think back to the cost curves I showed just now. Grey hydrogen costs have increased due to higher carbon costs, whilst blue hydrogen remains relatively flat and is still the cheapest form of production. Now, by 2050, further reductions in the cost of renewables and electrolyzers result in lower green hydrogen costs, and now green hydrogen from offshore wind is almost on a par with blue hydrogen. And is certainly lower than grey hydrogen. Now, there are a number of factors that could affect this outlook. Firstly, we could see faster reductions in the capex and opex of both renewables and electrolyzers. We could see higher gas prices affecting both blue and grey hydrogen production, although we could also see lower gas prices. And higher carbon prices also affect particularly grey, but also blue to a smaller extent. So in conclusion, and just to wrap up, we expect green hydrogen costs to reduce past 2025 once electrolyzer manufacturing costs start to come down. But what we also need to consider is that it's delivered hydrogen costs rather than just produced costs that will matter to the end user. And so we'll also need to consider other elements such as transportation costs and storage costs, which we expect to be needed with green hydrogen projects. It's also possible that new technologies could emerge that could reduce the cost of both green, but also maybe blue hydrogen as well. And just one final message is that what we think is important today is the facilitation of a stable regulatory environment that allows all technologies to develop so that we can decarbonize more quickly and at a cheaper overall cost to the benefit of all of us in the industry and to society as a whole. So thank you very much. When we issue the slides, we've got some contact details if you would like to get in touch with us to find out any more information. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing and go back to Carlos.
Thank you very much, John, for your presentation. And yes, if you have, for all of you who are in the audience, if you have any questions, please do send them through the chat and the Q&A function. So and we'll answer them as they come in. And well, and next up we have Kevin Bear from E.ON. Kevin, you're still on mute, but
I know.
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, and you will share my slide, right?
Yeah.
There
you
it
go.
is. There it is.
Brilliant. Over to you, Kevin.
Yeah. So thank you. Thank you, John. It was really good to see how you see the development of cost of hydrogen. I'm a sales guy, I'm head of sales, and I will come more over the market perspective, what is possible. So first of all, I will show you the pressure points on the increasing dynamics of the hydrogen economy. So, of course, we have the social pressure points in Europe. So here you see a lot of people in Europe want to have more CO2 tax. They want to use more hydrogen cars. So there are social pressure to reduce carbon a lot. Then we have action pressures by companies because their customers also want to be CO2 neutral. So refineries, especially for the car industry, they have a lot of pressure. Transport companies, the CO2 goals of countries and companies, this is a really big pressure point. So what we will get in all countries is a stricter regulation on CO2 because of the European CO2 goals. So in Germany, we will go up, it's finally defined to 65 euros per ton. But with the new election now, it could be around 100 euros or 150. So this regulation will be a driver for compatible hydrogen in the future. And what's also important is that we have now hydrogen technologies in a market-ready stage and in a really high development. For example, the cars, so mobility is very important, hydrogen trains, and you saw in John's presentation the development of costs of electrolyzers and all surroundings around the production of hydrogen. Here you see where hydrogen, in which branches it's used now. So we have transport, heavy goods, public transport, especially chemical industry for raw materials, ammonia. So refineries, you see it is large consumption, 63%. That's the data from Germany, but I think in other countries it's similar. Oil refineries, 31%, steel production, industrial process heat, lower than 1%, building and houses also lower than 1%. And this share will develop a lot, and we try to use hydrogen in the future also in all these areas different and enlarge it in the future. I know that for Germany, but it's in other countries, I think the same, that we have now Corona stimulus package program, subsidy program, where the government will invest in a large funding program for hydrogen measures like electrolyzers, 5 gigawatt capacity up to 2030, carbon contracts. They will develop with this money the change in the steel industry away from carbon. And also in heavy duty transport, hydrogen is in focus. So here you see which economic solutions are currently in focus and what we see together with our customers. So normally it should not be a future program to produce economic green hydrogen. And from our perspective and also in the customer discussions, a setup like you see now on the slide could fit already now. And very important is that we will combine different H2 demands. So very important is that what John also told to us, that we have directly renewable energy or payable PPAs on site nearby, or we have in the future H2 pipeline from Southern Europe, for example, to use the better efficiency of renewables from the south, and then bring via pipeline in Europe the H2 to the consumers in Central Europe, for example. So, but very important is that we have industry which is using it now, the hydrogen, because they have customers with enormous pressure on carbon reduction. And we see that the mobility sector is also very important, because the achievable prices and the higher benchmark prices of fuels is very important to drive, now, not in the future, hydrogen projects. And very important is also that in best cases we can use the oxygen out of an electrolyzer and also use the waste heat. And if all these surroundings will fit in a project, we are able to develop hydrogen projects now. So what kind of economic H2 projects will go live in this status? So we need CO2 sensible companies with a high customer pressure. So we got feedback out of the markets that €4 per kilogram H2 is acceptable price. So future upcoming higher CO2 prices and rules for industrial production will bring the H2 more competitive out of the renewables. Renewable energy nearby or payable PPA for lower OPEX is important. Then the H2 pipe I described with a cheaper produced, especially on the OPEX cost, produced H2 from Southern Europe. Then using the byproducts out of the H2 process, oxygen, for example, in wastewater plant, or for the burner primary air, or the heat then in district heating grids or other applications. Funding program to reduce the capex costs, or we hope in Germany that we will get also fundings for OPEX costs for H2 projects. And then in every case, we will see in the near future mobility connection is in the project, because they have the benchmark of 8 to 9 euros per kilogram, the business driver. And then what John also told to us, future capex, especially reduction of electrolyzers and raising the efficiency effects, is important to drive the projects in the future forward. That was from my side.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Very interesting presentation, and well, you can see, the questions coming in. We'll get back to them once all the presentations are done. And next up, we'll have Carola Kantz. So I think as I mentioned before, you will get a recording and the slides as well in the next couple of days, which is something that is regularly asked. And please do send your questions. And over to you, Carola.
Well, thank you very much, Carlos, and hello everybody again from my side. So as I mentioned, I work for VDMA, the Mechanical Engineering Industries Association. We are quite a big association with over 3,000 companies. And I particularly represent a platform on what we call Power to X, different along the value chain, very different companies. So you see companies looking into renewable energy, the process engineering, but also the applications. I brought you this this picture here, which looks into the different pathways of the Power-to-X production. Obviously, we want to look at the renewable hydrogen production. So you have renewable energy producing hydrogen and then using it. But we also like to emphasize that it's not only the hydrogen that you can use, but you can do other things with hydrogen. For instance, with Haber-Bosch, you can produce ammonia, you can produce methane, but also liquids with Fischer-Tropsch and methanization reactors. And here we will be in the lower part of the graphic, producing synthetic diesel, gasoline, kerosene, these products substituting in the mobility sector. So all these are the processes and applications we look at in our association. And now hydrogen is very much reported these days. It's in the spotlight at the moment. And if you think about what where you would like to use it, whether it's buildings, industry, mobility, there is always the question, well, but where will all the hydrogen come from? Now, what I will do in my presentation is that I look at the supply side and the demand side, particularly focusing on the case of Germany. As you may know, Germany has published its hydrogen strategy. It's been over a year now since they've published it last June. And one of the main pillars will be imports. Germany is one of the third least countries where you actually have a good or where you don't have good opportunities to produce renewable energy, but we are very energy intensive. So what Germany will need is to look abroad for hydrogen. And I brought you here, this is from a recent study by Carbon Tracker. Obviously, the global renewable energy potential is tremendous. You probably know all that. But just to have a look at this, I thought the graphic is still quite interesting to see. We're now here looking into petawatt hours, which is 1,000 times terawatt hours. And you can see that the economic potential is very large for renewable energy. And the total energy demand is not even remotely near to that. On the other hand side, what you can see is that at the moment we don't have many reserve in fossil fuels, but we produce a lot. And then we have a lot of reserve in solar and wind, but we don't produce enough of these. I'd like to mention that what's missing in that study is hydrogen, is hydropower, hydropower, which is obviously also a good component in producing hydrogen. So always bear in mind that we also have hydropowers. Now, we think it's important to harness this global potential. We think that the greatest beneficiaries probably will be Africa. They have around 39% of the global renewable energy potential. And Power-to-X will help to overcome the transport issue which we have with hydrogen. You may know that it's difficult. When you don't have a pipeline, it is difficult to transport. But if you have synthetic liquids produced out of hydrogen or ammonia, for instance, then it will be much easier to transport these with existing infrastructure. So this is also the way that Germany will go. You've seen it in a different slide before. John told you all that. I don't think I should go into detail with that again. We think that renewable hydrogen could break even with grey hydrogen before 2030 in the optimal regions. Germany won't be an optimal region, but others will be. Obviously, the drop in capex will be very significant, and we see more large-scale and integrated renewable hydrogen projects along the line in the next 10 years. This is a study we've supported from the Boston Consulting Group. They have estimated where will the hydrogen or the derivatives of hydrogen come from. And you can see that the net exporters, not surprisingly, will be North Africa, but also Latin America, Eastern Europe, Australia, and the Middle East. Whereas the net importers will be Japan, Korea, China, the US, Canada, and Western Europe. Now, looking into what is Germany doing, Kevin already told a little bit about the German hydrogen strategy published last year. As I said, they focus on scaling up and the application of hydrogen. So the goal is 5 gigawatt by 2030, which is roughly 15% of the consumed hydrogen, and an additional 5 gigawatt by 2035. This is domestic hydrogen. Obviously, we will need more hydrogen in Germany, and this will be covered by imports and by blue hydrogen. And the first uptake markets will be steel, chemicals probably they will substitute the grey with the blue, and the transport here specifically looking into aviation and heavy duty based on renewable hydrogen. What are the main instruments to achieve these goals? Well, first of all, we have implemented the Renewable Energy Directive. This is a European directive which Germany and all the other member states needed to implement. We have now ambitious greenhouse gas reduction targets, minus 25% in 2030. We will, or the government is incentivizing the use of green hydrogen in conventional refinery processes, so substituting the grey with the green. And we will have a 2% blending mandate in aviation by 2030. And this will not be hydrogen, but a derivative, so the power to liquid, the synthetic kerosene that Germany will use. We also will have pilot projects of the so-called carbon contracts for difference for steel and chemicals. This is basically a contract between a company, let's say a steel company, a steelmaking company, and the government. They estimate a higher CO2 price, and they will refund the CO2 price, the difference, as it's basically an OPEX funding mechanism. We have now exemptions from the feed-in tariff levies for the hydrogen production in Germany. This has been just coming along as the government is going into the summer break, and we are establishing international hydrogen markets. Just yesterday, the H2 Global, which is basically a foundation organizing trades between the uptake markets in Germany and producer countries like in North Africa, has been launched. And the last thing I would like to mention are the IPCEIs, one of the buzzwords in Brussels these days, the industrial projects of European common interest. And Germany published its 65 hydrogen projects that are on the way, and that will be also subsidized just 2 weeks ago, I think. Yeah, so I think there's much going on, and what we will see are a lot of emerging opportunities for the industry, also obviously for the mechanical engineering industry. And so what we will see in the next decade is a significant market ramp up of the green hydrogen production, not all in Europe, but also elsewhere. We will see the move from the currently installed base of electrolyzers, which is at the moment in the lower megawatt range, to the gigawatt size capacities, which will then contribute to the economies of scale and driving down the capex. We have an EU target, which is actually very ambitious, which is the 2 times 40 gigawatt electrolyzer capacity by 2030. And this alone indicates a market size for 40 billion euros within the EU only until 2030. So again, huge market opportunities. The target sectors, as I said, transport and industry. We think that e-fuels for the road sector should also play a role. But what we will really see is that power-to-X energy carriers, whether it's hydrogen directly or derivatives, they will become an important commodity in the international energy markets. And so those regions with low electricity energy regeneration costs will take an opportunity as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carola, for your presentation. Very interesting, and it has given food for thought to the audience who have been sending in more questions, and then we'll move on to the next presentation by Stefan Rachelstein. Stefan, how are you today?
Quite well, thank you. Perhaps we should start at the beginning with the presentation. Then you go to the opening.
Yes.
Thank you, Carla. So, yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to build on several of the things that the other three panelists already mentioned or touched upon. You'll see I'll also approach these from a slightly different angle on some of the detailed issues. So now perhaps we could go to the first slide, to the next slide. This one I'll keep brief, even though it has a lot of words on it, largely because both Kevin and Carola already went there, just to sort of in a number of bullet points again summarize why there is so much excitement about hydrogen as an energy platform. It is very versatile in terms of uses and how it could ultimately play an important role in decarbonizing the energy system, with the applications that you're seeing listed there. And again, in the interest of time, I'll keep this short. What have we sort of seen? Well, basically, this potential has been known for a long time, but we haven't really seen much in the way of non-traditional hydrogen generation that is away from steam methane reforming until recently. And the question is has the time now really come for alternative ways of producing hydrogen, particularly low carbon ways of producing hydrogen? Is the time right for this? Next slide, please. So here, again, building on some of the things that have already been said, we have in our institute and with the studies that I want to tell you about in a moment, we have focused largely on proton exchange or PEM electrolyzers. And you see listed here what are sort of considered their advantages or also disadvantages relative to other electrolyzer technology. If time permits, at the very end, I would also like to speak briefly about solid oxide cells, which to many are sort of the new star in this arena with potential, though it's a little bit early to draw firm conclusions on that. Next slide, please. So what you see here, and I hope the picture is large enough, is if we think about costs of electrolysis and cost of hydrogen, the equipment cost, of course, is terribly important. And the equipment cost is basically the cost of the electrolyzer and the balance of system, as John had mentioned initially. Now, in this chart, we have actually sort of shown the projection or the progress in the cost of electrolyzers in a slightly different fashion. What you see is on the vertical axis and on the horizontal axis are logarithms. So this is basically cumulative volume in terms of electrolyzers that have been built and installed, and against price in dollars per watt or kilowatt, watt in this case. This is what sort of the format of the classical learning curve that many of you may have seen in other contexts. It basically allows you to ask, with every doubling of cumulative volume of the deployment of this technology, by how far have the prices of these electrolyzers come down? And you see here our estimate on it based on a very simple regression analysis is it's about a 10% learning rate, meaning that with every doubling of cumulative volume, you would achieve a 10% reduction in the price. You saw the earlier slides by John showing price as a function of time. And that is, of course, also a perfectly good way to look at it, except this one, in my mind, has the advantage that it really drives home the point, ultimately, how quickly the cost of electrolyzers is going to come down is probably not so much a function of time, but more of deployments. And then we're coming now to the various governmental goals, the regulatory framework that makes sure that these deployments actually happen, because more deployments will beget cost reductions. We have seen this for renewable energy, both in the context of solar and wind, to be actually verified and the numbers to conform to these learning curves in this format in a very impressive manner. In particular, solar PV has really over a period of 30 years conformed very nicely to an 80% learning curve. That is, the cost has basically fallen by 20% with every doubling of the cumulative volume of solar installations. 10% is not as impressive as what we have seen for solar, but it's incidentally roughly comparable to the learning rates we've seen for onshore wind power all over the world. But keep in mind, the electrolyzer itself and the cost of the electrolyzer, the price of the electrolyzer is only one of the components ultimately of producing the cost of hydrogen, as was again mentioned by the previous speakers. If we could go to the next slide. So what I would like to look at here now when it comes to the levelized cost of hydrogen, which is ultimately the number that we are sort of most interested to see how competitive really electrolysis has become. I'm going to do a slight twist to what the previous speakers talked about, in particular John. You see here in my diagram, there's a lot of action in somebody's background there, but I'll talk over that. So what you see here is we're also imagining a renewable energy source being basically generating the electricity that needs to go into the process. But the twist here is that we also want to maintain connection with the grid. So your renewable energy source, say wind in Germany, could also supply to the grid, or it could supply to the electrolyzer, and vice versa in times when your renewable source is not delivering much power. You wouldn't have to starve your electrolyzer because you could go in the other direction and rely on the grid. So this intuitively, this should sort of indicate to you, it gives you tremendous flexibility, or much more flexibility, in terms of playing on the price fluctuations in the grid. Sometimes it may be more economical to starve your electrolyzer and use the renewable power at times when it's scarce and feed it into the power market, and vice versa to go in the other direction. Next slide, please. So that brings me then sort of to the determinants of the falling cost of hydrogen. We've talked about the system prices for electrolyzers. Conversion efficiencies are increasing, albeit not that quickly. But the other two items are really related to the variable, the operating costs of electrolysis. Number one, the average cost of renewable electricity is coming down. And the second part are these price fluctuations, of which we're seeing more and more in the wholesale power markets in various jurisdictions in the world. Hydrogen, in particular, if sort of structured in the type of deal that I'd shown you on the previous slide, is well positioned to essentially absorb these price fluctuations and take advantage of that so as to lower the average cost then of producing the hydrogen. So all of these factors, higher volatility in power markets is actually a good thing for the overall life cycle cost of electrolysis-based hydrogen. And one more slide, please. So where does this leave us in terms of our estimates? If you're asking what are break-even prices for hydrogen in the current environment for, say, PEM electrolyzers, you're seeing we've done this for Germany and Texas separately. And there are three markers in each for each of those two jurisdictions. One, the blue ones, the integrated ones, is exactly the system that I showed you. That gives you the lowest break-even prices. In other words, that's what an investor who wants to earn an appropriate cost return on the investment would have to sell the hydrogen for on average in order to be able to break even. And then the other dots are if you had only the renewable source. So that's what John, I think, originally talked about. If you really just wanted green hydrogen strictly, and you only connect your electrolyzer to a renewable source, it would make things a little worse, a little less favorable in terms of the break-even prices. And the last item is the possibility of what we call standalone, where you just interact with the grid alone in terms of the electrolyzer. So the key point is being able to play this price arbitrage game in real time with an electrolyzer that can ramp up and down very quickly improves the economics quite considerably. And I think I have one more slide and then I'm done. So what we're actually currently working on is moving away from PEM electrolyzers to take a look at solid oxide cells. And those I mentioned at the beginning, they're probably the new kid on the block here. What makes them particularly exciting to us is that they can work bidirectionally, and they can actually switch relatively quickly in that you can use them like a traditional electrolyzer, but you can also use them as a fuel cell going in the opposite direction. At times when power prices are very high and you have a reservoir of hydrogen, you can go back in the other direction and basically supply additional power to the markets. We have run this sort of system, now simulated it in the Texas market. Why Texas? Texas is probably one of those places that has the highest volatility of prices throughout the day and throughout the year. And as I mentioned earlier, that's a good thing if you have a flexible technology like that. And we're finding in the current environment, the prices would have to be about $2.59 for a kilogram of hydrogen to sell in order for these systems to break even. On reversible power to gas in the form of solid oxide cells, I should also mention this is a new technology, so there we would expect, as they are now being increasingly deployed, we would expect the system price cost to come down very quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefan, for your presentation. So now we'll all come back to the screen and we'll answer some of the questions from the audience. So I know, Kevin, that you've warned me that you need to leave at 12 sharp. So we'll bear that in mind. So, okay, let's start with a question on cost, which I think that I see quite often, and Gordon has asked, as the energy content of hydrogen by volume is only a third of natural gas, will hydrogen be a third of the cost, or will our household bills, heating bills, triple? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll just go first. It's a really good question. The cost that I showed in our charts are a cost per energy. So the energy value you're getting in the LCOH charts I showed is already taken into account the difference between natural gas and hydrogen. But what you do need to consider is that if you're using, or you're trying to replace natural gas with hydrogen, whether it's blue hydrogen or green hydrogen, the costs are going to be higher. Particularly, just think about blue hydrogen. You're using natural gas to produce the hydrogen, so the additional costs that you're going to have in that process are going to increase the cost of the hydrogen. Green hydrogen, with it being more expensive than blue currently and probably into the future, means that those green hydrogen costs are going to be higher again. So yes, but what we need to do, and this is really important, is when we think about decarbonisation, we shouldn't be comparing future costs against today's costs. Costs will increase as we decarbonise. So what we need to do in the future is compare future costs against alternative future costs to see which is the most economic solution.
Thank you, John. I don't know if anyone else would like to add to that.
Yeah, I agree. So in the main cases, we see It is not competitive to natural gas at this moment, but like John described, increasing CO2 prices and what we see in the markets in I would say middle term future, we can talk about hydrogen for heating system in households. What I also wrote in the chat that we see some projects where behind an electrolyzer we will build low temperature district heating grids to use the outcome, the byproduct of the electrolyzer for heat residential areas. So that could be an option.
I can quickly add to the point. Absolutely, compare future costs to future costs, and as the decarbonization process proceeds, if now natural gas for heating purposes in homes and buildings is also burdened, say, with a 50 euro per ton price, the equation changes very quickly.
Thank you, Stefan. And I think one of the takeaways I had from your presentations is how important electricity costs are to the production of green hydrogen. So, but also that I think I saw that the economics would be improved if you can connect to the grid. So would that be green hydrogen now if you connect it to the grid? Because not the entire grid is green. So suppose
Correct.
it's more.
Correct. That's why I hope you were directing the question to me, so I'll answer. Absolutely, and that's I thought that was important to point out. Yes, then you do not have strictly what people refer to as green hydrogen. It may be sort of called turquoise or whatever color coding you may want to employ here. But let's keep in mind the grid in many parts of the world is increasingly greening itself. So then this trade-off is already much diminished. You have, if you are sort of not a purist about it and you say, I'm perfectly willing to play the economics by also relying on gray power from the grid, you do have the advantage that you're deploying faster, and that will make probably the cost of electrolysis through cheaper electrolyzers in turn better. So in other words, you may dance for some time with a carbon source in order to advance the cost of the electrolyzer.
Carol, I think you want to say
that on the question of what is grey and green from the grid. There is a delegated act actually at European level that is currently being worked out, defining certain criteria on when the electricity you use will then be green. So there are requirements such as additionality, geographical and temporal correlation, things like that. So power purchase agreements, as John said, will be very important. We expect the delegated act to be published by the end of the year. But depending on how these the delegated act will actually be established, it might also be actually a bit of a barrier of bringing new electrolyzers into the market, because those who are actually doing the project operators will actually need to care for the renewable energy coming into the market themselves. So we will see about that by the end of the year.
Thank you, Carol. And I think, I had a question in mind as well that maybe you can shed light on, seeing as it is that you're based in Brussels. I was wondering, how the regulation takes into account the carbon content of fuels that would be made from blue hydrogen. Has there been discussion about this? Is there anything do we know in which direction the regulation will go?
Well, we have two packages that we're waiting for at the moment here in Brussels. One is the Fit for 55 package with the revision of the RED II, and the other one is the gas market package by the end of the year. For the time being, the Fit for 55 will be published by the 14th of July. We don't know yet where the color code will be regulated. It might be the future RED III. It might also be in the gas market, it might be a combination of both. I haven't seen. I know that this is discussed in the Commission, but the leaks I have seen at the moment, they don't really show where the direction is going. But by the end of the year, it will be quite clear that the CO2 content will be regulated, and we will have a clear, let's say, taxonomy on how, the different color codes, as you said.
I think that's a really important point, and we have a lot of discussions with investors and project developers who are looking at, ideal project configurations about whether they connect to the grid. And it's still really uncertain, as Carol has just pointed out, because I think the number that was in the last EU taxonomy document was around 3 tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of hydrogen produced. That was increased following some quite heavy lobbying from certain parties, because the original figure was much lower. Certainly would knock out most blue hydrogen, certainly most grid-connected electrolysis today with the carbon intensity of the grids. One thing that's really interesting is that, and a decision wasn't taken on this, was about the status of nuclear. And nuclear potentially is really interesting when we think about electrolysis, because you can increase the load factor significantly. So if nuclear will be considered as a sustainable low carbon fuel and nuclear power can be used directly, then that becomes really interesting for the economics of hydrogen production. Obviously, the cost of nuclear power is much higher, but the load factors are that much higher. And also there's a lot of waste heat that you can use as well, potentially in solid oxide electrolyzers. So the further news and further developments on all these issues is really going to be welcomed by the industry in order to give us some certainty going forward.
Thank you, John. And I think, with regards to cost, I think it's quite clear from the information shown by all of you that there are places that have better renewable resources than most European locations. So the cost of renewable hydrogen would be lower. But what about the cost of delivering that hydrogen? Has it been envisaged that it would be viable to import a large quantity of renewable hydrogen into Europe from places like Morocco or Saudi Arabia that have great solar resources, for example?
Yeah, and that question of delivered costs, which I think I touched on right at the end of my my slide, is the really important one. We need to understand what price the end user will be paying. And certainly, although we'll be able to produce hydrogen much more cheaply in Middle East and North Africa, you then need to think about how you transport it. Transporting of our liquid hydrogen is going to require a whole load of energy to convert it and keep it at the right temperature. You can convert to ammonia and transport ammonia, which is easier, but then there are additional costs to consider in the conversion to ammonia. The ammonia could then be used directly or converted back to hydrogen, or there is also the option of liquid organic hydrogen carriers, which is a relatively new technology. So those costs currently are high, but again, we would expect those costs to come down. The question for Europe, I think, in terms of importing hydrogen, as well as the cost issue, it's also the ambitions of Europe and an import requirement that Europe will have. In particular, if you look at the hydrogen strategy and the ambition in Germany, we expect Germany to have a relatively high 80-90% import requirement for hydrogen. So the question of cost might, is really important, but because of that import dependency, it might be the case that you will need to import hydrogen either via pipeline from various places, potentially from Southern Europe, potentially from Eastern Europe, Russia, and also potentially via ship from Middle East, North Africa.
Thank you very much, John. I think, we only have a couple of minutes left, but Stefan, go.
Can I throw in a very quick question? Because what you just mentioned, John, I've heard discussed frequently, but I don't really have any numbers or any sense of the orders of magnitude. If you go the ammonia route for transportation, and then you convert back to hydrogen, basically once it has been transported, what's sort of the order of magnitude of the conversion losses that is converting ammonia back to hydrogen by itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I haven't got the number off the top of my head, but we can pick that up later. But this is why, if you can use the ammonia rather than converting back to hydrogen, it certainly helps. And so there's a lot of interest at the moment in using ammonia, particularly in the maritime sector.
Right.
But also, if you look at countries like Japan, South Korea, they are looking at co-firing coal with ammonia, initially up to a blend of around about 20%, and then potentially converting to run 100% on ammonia in the future. So you don't necessarily have to convert it back into the hydrogen.
Mhm.
Well,
One more
Kevin.
question from my side, John. The price readiness I described, where the markets are. So I have industrial customers. They buy now the hydrogen around 1.50 euros per kilogram from Linde or Air Liquide, and they now want to produce this themselves for around, it's then green, of course, for 4 euros. So we see in the market, and that's our really large industrial customers, that they want to pay more for it if it's green, because the pressure of their customers is very high. So that is a factor we should also look on. What is your opinion about it, John or Stefan?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And I think all industrial users need to balance the goal to decarbonize, either in their corporate strategies, whatever, but also with the need to remain competitive. And so, if you're doubling or tripling the fuel cost as a feedstock for whatever process, the cost of their product will increase. They will want to remain competitive. And this is where I think we need some form of support mechanisms, particularly in the early stages of hydrogen development, in order to help those industries convert to lower carbon hydrogen. And then once the costs come down, or the existing gas costs, grey hydrogen costs go up, and when it becomes competitive, those support mechanisms won't be needed. But I think we really need that in the early stages in order to get things kick-started in the industrial sector.
Thank you. Thank you.
If I can just build on that, I think, Kevin, what you mentioned, the ratio of 150 versus $4, of course, is pretty extreme. And that must mean that the buyers really are very serious about their own carbon reduction goals. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. But fortunately, I think all the trends are pointing in the direction that that burden that you would have to pay for going really strictly with green hydrogen is coming down all the time. And I think we are already sort of more in the range of 250 at the moment with current.
Good, thank you.
Great. Well, I think we have questions to continue this conversation for another 2 hours, but unfortunately, time has run out. And I'd like to thank all of you, Carola, Stefan, Kevin, and John for being with us today, and everyone in the audience as well. And just to let you know, we have another webinar coming up on the 1st of July, which is on financing renewable hydrogen projects. So if you if you're interested in hydrogen, you'd probably like to attend this one as well. And thank you to everyone again, and see you here next time.
Thank
See you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye bye.